Thank you, Chair Durfee, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Oliver Pearson. I'm the Director of the Division of Forests in the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. I'll be very brief. I just want to introduce this subject. But yeah, today we'll be talking about the heavy cut regulations that FPR implements on forests in Vermont, as well as the AMPs, also known as the Acceptable Management Practices, for logging operations in the state, which is our commitment to maintaining water quality through the course of implementing logging operations. We're very lucky to have Dave Wilcox, who will be giving the presentation to you here today. He's an extremely experienced forester and has been working on both of these issues for years. So I'll give him the floor in a minute. I just want to make 2 points. In FPR, we have limited regulatory authorities, but heavy cut and AMP are two of the areas where we do have regulatory authorities, and we take them very seriously. They're both very important parts of our work to ensure sustainable forest management and to ensure that logging operations do not have a negative impact on water quality. Some of these are looped into the Lake Champlain Total Maximum Daily Load Phosphorus Reduction Plan. And so there's good interdepartmental coordination within the Agency of Natural Resources in that area. Second, Dave leads a team of just 3 people, who is our watershed forestry team within the private lands program. And they do this work and with some assistance from state lands foresters with regulatory training and experience, but they do this work on top of many other responsibilities that they have. So it's a small but mighty team that really ensures compliance with these regulations statewide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave, and thank you.
Dave, thank you for joining us. And I don't know whether you've been in the committee room in the past, not this year anyway, but so just very quickly, we'll go and introduce ourselves. I'm David Durfee. I'm from Shaftesbury down in Bennington County.
Greg Burt, Cabot, representing Cabot Daniel.
Michelle Boslin, Westminster, Rockingham, and Brookline in Northern Windham County.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille One Stowe, welcome.
I'm Leland Morgan. I represent all of Grand Isle County and the western portion of the town of Milton.
And Richard Nelson, Orleans One, Derby.
Sidonia is our committee assistant. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Durfee and members of the committee. I'm happy to be here to go over my presentation. I'll just run through. I have it's 2 parts. One beginning part, I'll talk about heavy cutting, and then I'll get into the acceptable management practices. And I'm sure we'll have time at the end for questions, but at any point in time, if you have something that feel free to just interrupt and I'll address it. So the heavy cutting law in Vermont became law in 1997 as a response to concerns about clear cutting and the potential environmental impacts. There were some notable harvests around the state. One close by to here, right behind Berlin Pond, there was a several hundred acre parcel that was liquidated, so to speak. That was the term that folks were using for purchasing land, harvesting the timber entirely, and then selling the land. And the liquidation harvest was kind of the phrase that folks were keying in on. And these are just some photos of what heavy cutting, how it appears. And the photo on the top is from an aerial view of a heavy cut that is actually right exactly 40 acres with the power line going through it. That's one of the ones that we investigated. But so that's the history of when the law went into effect. So what defines a heavy cut? It's a forestry term. A lot of folks think of clear cutting and or even age management. The terminologies are somewhat variable on what folks use to describe it. But for the purposes of this law, we define a heavy cut as a harvest which leaves a residual stocking level. And so that's the trees that remain on the site. And those trees are acceptable trees. They're not half dead. They're not broken off with one live branch. That's, they have to be something in the future below what we call the C line, which is a stocking level based on silvicultural, the silvicultural guides for the applicable timber type. Because every forest has a different makeup of species and based on soils and elevation and slope and aspect even. So a northern hardwood stand is going to be very different than a pine stand as far as where the sea line is and what the residual stocking has to be in terms of basal area. I know these terms are they're a little, but we'll get into that a little bit. And then again, AGS is a stem having a diameter of 4.5 inches, DBH, which is breast height, 4.5 feet above the ground, which has the potential to produce a sawlog product of a commercial species of any grade. So striped maple is not commercial, that doesn't count. Things like, all of your typical timber species, hop hornbeam is considered a timber species. That's one of the ones on the edge of what really is a timber species, but and it has to be, like I said before, it has to be healthy enough and have the potential to become a sawlog product now or in the future. Now, the sea line which is this graph, is basically how we plot the density of a stand to determine what the prescription or what our going forward, what our management is going to be. And so when you measure on the left, the basal area, which is the area of the tree that is above 4.5 feet, and you add it all together and in square feet, and the bottom line on the bottom is trees per acre, you can plot that stand on that graph. And if you're way up by the A line, then you're overstocked. You have a forest that's almost crowded. And when you get down to the B line, you have a forest that's well spaced. You have free crowns that can grow. You have a lot of growth and activity in that stand. That stand is thriving. And when you get to the sea line or below, you don't really have you're so to speak wasting energy, sunlight and soil nutrients and so on that could be going into tree growth, but are not typically, but instead are going into growth of ferns and herbaceous plants and raspberries and things like that, which just in terms of forest management is determined to be almost not a forest, not a forest worth managing at that point. It's without just waiting a few decades for it to grow back up. So the sea line is a very well-known in the forestry field measurement that we can utilize to determine if that forest is cut below what is a low level of productivity or forest health. And so, these are aerial photos. Again, the one on the left is a photo of a harvest that was below the sea line. The basal area there might be, I think it was around 25 to 30 square feet of basal area. And the harvest on the right is actually not below the sea line. And again, the law or that regulates heavy cutting has an acreage component as well. So it has to be a certain size to trigger the law. So, and that's 40 acres. If there's an area below 40 acres that is below the sea line, then that's perfectly fine in terms of the heavy cut law. But as soon as you get to 40 acres or more and you have that contiguous area or group of areas within 1,000 feet, we'll get into that, below the sea line, that's when you trigger the heavy cut law. So if somebody wants to do a 10-acre clear cut, they're fine to do that without a permit or without any permission from, or they don't need to fill out a heavy cut. So the area on the right is not a heavy cut. The area on the left is. Now, if you were on the ground looking at a forested setting, these three photos represent what you would see if you were looking on the left at a stand that's at the A line, that's somewhat overstocked or full stocking. And then in the photo in the middle would be a stand that's at beeline stocking. You see those trees have a lot of room. The crowns are free. And photos never do justice for what you're trying to show, but you can see the difference. And then the photo on the right is an area that was below the sea line. The basal area there was less than 20 square feet. And the sea line would be about 45 square feet of basal area. So those are kind of good representations of a northern hardwood stand.
Representative Lipsky, did you want
Yeah, just a quick question, David. Is a sea line cut or even below is that forest more susceptible for invasive species, non-desirable species to propagate than a bee line, for instance? Or that's off topic.
No, I don't think it's off topic. Any increase of sunlight, any disturbance in the forest can help out invasive species. There's a lot of things that play into that, like how many or what's the status of invasive plants to begin with, and a lot of times, we would recommend that someone treat their invasives before they do a harvest, because any type of harvesting can advance the movement of invasives out through the forest. A feline harvest, yes, would be more favorable to invasives than a beeline harvest. Straight up, yes.
Thank you.
So I guess the question, we'd ask ourselves is why would anybody want to do a heavy cut? Well, a heavy cut or a clear cut or even age management is a true tried and true silvicultural practice that allows us to regrow and reintroduce regeneration and promote forest health and forest sustainability and forest management, good forest management. So, and you can see the examples on the top is a shelter wood where you would adjust the light regime so that you've got enough sunlight to get certain species to regenerate, while others wouldn't have enough sunlight, or and while those trees can have enough energy and growth to surpass the slower growing trees. The photo in the middle is a series of patch cuts. Those are, I think, 2 to 4 acre patch cuts. That's actually on a wildlife management area. And there's, I don't know, I think 30 acres maybe in total of area of patches there. And that's to promote ruffed grouse habitat. In this even age hardwood stand, there was no early successional habitat for grouse. That was one of the management goals on this WMA. So their strategy is to create it through blocks of even-aged species or even-aged management. And then this was the first harvest. Since then, there have been 2 more years and 2 more cycles, I guess, each about 10 years apart. So you have this really young forest and then a little bit older, which is another habitat type for ruffed grouse and other animals, and then you have a little bit older, and then you have the mature forest. So it's structure, introducing structure into the forest. And then the stand on the right, or the photo on the right, is a view of an overstory removal where you have some advanced regeneration, and to allow it to grow maximum at the maximum rate, you take the overstory off, and in some cases that overstory may have been created in a shelterwood harvest, which is the photo on the top. So those shelterwood harvests kind of go through different stages, where the final stage is to remove that overstory and let it and let the regeneration grow. And you might not be in that stand for another 30 or 40 years, but you have good growth and a nice diversity of species and so on. Some of the other reasons for heavy cutting, of course, agricultural conversion. And that's an exemption in our heavy cut in the heavy cut rules. Also salvage operations. You can see this was I think this is actually Katy Hill, this photo. Where,
I worked on that 2 3/4 acre patch.
yeah. And then in 1998, we had the ice storm, which triggered a lot of salvage cutting in our stands. And that was actually right after the heavy cut law went into effect. The law went into effect in 97, and the ice storm hit in January 98. And for years, we had a lot of salvage. People were worried about the loss of the value of the trees in the forest. And they wanted to capture that. So, all in all, keeping forests is the goal. Keeping forests as forests is the goal. Having all the tools in the toolbox, including evenage management, is needed to accomplish that goal. And not necessarily an advertisement here for clear cutting, but just to say that it is an important part of how we manage the forest, the diversity of forests and different age classes and so on. And while it may not look like a healthy, thriving forest, it may be exactly what the forest needs to be healthy in terms of, previous cuttings, strategies, again, insect and disease or ice storms, wind throws, that sort of thing. It is one way to accomplish that goal. So getting to the heavy cut law itself, when is a permit needed? A notice of intent to cut is needed when a landowner proposes to heavy cut more than 40 acres within a 1,000-foot radius or more than 80 acres within a 2-mile radius within 5 years. So that's intended to spread those areas out that are harvested. And this it's a little hard to envision how that works, but it takes mapping of the areas and determining how far apart they are. And in the application, people need to let us know where they have done recent harvests. And we have a map, a GIS layer of all the harvests that we use to kind of verify that people aren't violating that more than 80 acres within 2 miles within 5 years. So if you do a harvest 5 years later, that harvest comes off the books, basically. And keeping track of that is one of the administrative responsibilities of FPR. And the notice of intent to cut is filed with FPR. The heavy cut forester, we have a heavy cut forester assigned to each district, each forestry district, and they review that, the notice, determine if it's complete, if all the information is there. There are several exemptions that we'll talk about. And if no exemptions apply, the harvest prescription is reviewed just similar to how a county forester would review a prescription in the UVA program to determine if that silviculture, the silvicultural prescription is warranted, and it's sound silviculture. And if it is, the permit is approved. And if it's not, we would work with the logger landowner to amend that, or forester in most cases, to amend that plan so that the silviculture did meet the standards. And then we would work with that forester logger to follow through and make sure that happened. And in most cases, I'm not going to say all cases, but in most cases, a site visit is done because we want to verify that the data they're giving us, it represents accurately what's out in the field. And they're not saying there's good regeneration and we want to do an overstory removal. If we go out there and there's no regeneration, then that's really not valid. So that's one thing that we look for. And then we maintain the data in the database, and through the heavy cut foresters and the admin assistants. I mentioned the exemptions. A heavy cut is exempt from the review if the landowner certifies one of the following. If it's consistent with an approved management plan. So that could be a UVA plan. It could be a different, one of the other plans is our department has long-range management plans, and we prescribe heavy cuts periodically in those plans. And when we do that, that's one of those approved management plans. Agricultural conversion is an exemption. Land use conversion under the jurisdiction of Act 250. So when there's other regulatory scenarios that kick in, water quality and so on, and we know that's part of a development plan and it's approved, so to speak. That's an exemption. And then we do have some people, we have for informational purposes only, and simply that's what heavy cuts that are less than 40 acres, so they wouldn't really need a heavy cut permit. But they want to notify us that, hey, we're doing a 30-acre clear cut next to Route 4, and people are gonna notice it and they're gonna call you, and we'd like you to know that and know that we're following all of everything that we need to. I lost my train of thought there. That exemption, it's similar to like the fire warden, you get a fire permit, if you see smoke, they call up, they know they don't have to run down and put a fire out. The other thing I was going to mention is after we approve a permit, whether it's an exemption or a permit itself, we write a letter to the town where that harvest is in and let them know that there's a heavy cut taking place on this parcel and at this period of time, and that it's approved. They can get any of the details that they want. So that's just to let folks know what's happening.
David, in any of those cases where they're exempt from a review, do they still have to file a request or file a notice rather? Or is it not, the notice isn't even necessary?
In the informational ones?
They're on the list on that previous slide, so.
They fill out the application, they fill out the appropriate exemption checkoff.
Got it.
And then they supply us with the plan, when the plan was approved and a map. We don't have to look at the silviculture because that's already been approved by the county forester in most cases. Sometimes it's at one point that silviculture has been approved. So we're just verifying that the acreages are right and the map is accurate. So if somebody calls us to say there's a heavy cut, we can say, yes, it's because it's following this plan that was approved this date by this person, and it's approved. As long as they're following that plan, the person doing the heavy cut is following the requirements.
Thank you.
So we do collect information more than just the application, but it's really just to verify that we know where it is. And it's another level, I guess, of to make sure that people are following the plans that have been approved. So who's liable for heavy cut violations? It's the landowner essentially, unless the logging contractor holds an ownership in the land or standing timber. And so if the logger is acting purely as the landowner's agent, they are not responsible. It's the landowner that fills out the permit. So I'll stop right there and see if there's any questions.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, David, let's envision a 40-acre approved cut, but there are some intermittent streams or even perennial streams that may have some steep slopes within that 40 acres. Are those buffer areas for riparian or slope excluded from the right to harvest to that sea line in those areas? Or are there any sort of sensitive areas, if there was a vernal pool, for instance, within that 40 acres?
So if you were
How do
talking,
you engage with those potential sensitive areas?
so if you had a parcel that was exactly 40 acres and they have some type of forest buffer that's above the sea line, they don't need to file a permit because they're not going to have more than 40 acres below the sea line. If they're just above 40 acres and they truly need a heavy cut permit, they're required to follow the AMPs. So therefore, any streams or wetlands or open water, whatever, has to have a buffer that will be beeline stocking or above, because that's what the AMPs say are mandatory for buffers. So conceivably, you could have a 50-acre parcel with a significant amount of heavy cutting, but not 40 acres if you had a lot of buffers. And that's luckily we have good mapping capabilities now, and we can determine that. And the onus is on the forester who lays out the harvest to say, oh, we're close to 40 acres. We need to get a heavy cut permit. And if they have the silvicultural reasons and the data behind it, that's not a problem. They can get a permit. They have to go through the steps, but it's not hard to do. And so does that answer your question on the buffers don't count as area? When we do an investigation of a heavy cut, we get a complaint, and we go out to do an investigation. We only look at and inventory the areas that are below the sea line. Sometimes we have to take some points to figure out where that is, but we don't average it. We don't say, okay, here's 100 square feet and here's 0 square feet. The average is 50. We don't do that. We say, okay, what areas are above, if the sea line is 45, we say what areas are above 45, and we take that area out. Then we look at the area that's below 45, figure out an average basal area there and size, and that's what we would use to say, yes, you have more than 40 acres below the sea line, or you don't. Does that help?
Yeah, but basically AMPs are required to be followed, whether it's a 15-acre cut or a 60-acre cut.
Yes.
That was my question.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions on the heavy cut section?
Okay.
Thank you.
Move on to the AMPs. Okay, the acceptable management practices. The purpose of the AMPs on logging jobs is to provide sound practices for loggers, foresters, and landowners to implement before, during, and after a timber harvest, comply with Vermont water quality standards. And they've been around. Well, I'll get to that. Jumping ahead. So where did the AMPs come from? Discharges of waste into waters of the state without a permit are violations of the State Water Pollution Control Act, starting around the mid to late 80s. The AMPs went into effect in 1987. AMP rules were promulgated under that authority, and when implemented properly, relieve a person from the obligation of obtaining a permit for discharges associated with logging operations. So and that person has to be a logger doing forest management. It can't be, somebody out in their woods building a trail for some other purpose. These are for commercial harvests. And if there is a discharge associated with a logging operation, the first thing we look at is, did you implement the AMPs properly? And if they did, then that discharge is approved, so to speak, based on this law. And if it's not, then no, they are in violation of that rule. So and they apply on all logging operations on public and private lands. And what are they? What actually are those practices? They're on the photo on the left is a temporary stream crossing with a steel pipe and poles and brush to protect that stream channel while the logging is happening. And then that straw crossing gets removed and seeded and mulched. And the middle photo it's not that same spot, but it could very well be. That's what a closed out stream crossing looks like, where you remove this temporary crossing structure, you stabilize it with seed and mulch, put water bars on both sides so that the surface water from the road can't get into the stream. The photo on the right is a temporary stream crossing using one of our 25-foot steel bridges. It gets the logging machinery out of the stream, protects the stream banks, and then eventually that gets pulled, and there's no structure there to inhibit the stream in the future. And they're economical, they're portable, they get used multiple times. We're doing a lot of those. We'll talk more about temporary bridges. And they're applied to all the aspects of the timber sale: truck roads, skid trails, stream crossings, riparian areas, and log landings. Some of the other practices: water bars, to disconnect the surface water, to spread the surface water back out. Basically, the goal of the AMPs in general is to spread water out and let it sink in to the ground without becoming a flow that has the opportunity to erode or carry sediment. It includes truck roads, with the photo in the middle is a properly sized stream crossing with a good header, seeded and mulched, and a good trucking surface on top. Then the photo on the right is a temporary truck bridge, which is we have two now. We're going to have four very shortly, and they're intended to just like a temporary skidder bridge, but you can open those up and drive over them with a loaded log truck, and you can span 35 feet with our 40-foot bridge and 25 feet with our 30-foot bridge.
And Morgan,
Yes, question.
Just a quick question. How do they get to that site? Do they drag them in, or are they brought in on some?
Good question. A combination of those things. It depends on a lot of these truck roads. You can back a trailer right up to it and just slide it right off the back over the bridge, and then you just build a ramp on either end with dirt to get up onto it, because I think they're 16 inches tall. And in other cases, they drag them out into the woods. We have used these for skidding on a state timber sale in Victory. We dragged one, I don't know, quarter mile out in the woods, put it across a stream, well, as wide as this table is long, probably more, and just laid it over it. And in 2 hours had a beautiful stream crossing, and the stream didn't even know we were there. So it's a combination of a lot of operators now have bigger machines. They have excavators, they have feller bunchers that can lift this thing up, no problem. So who's responsible for AMPs? Loggers are responsible for implementing the AMPs when they're operating. And landowners are, we say, ultimately responsible for any discharges that occur on their land. In most cases, landowners will convey to the logger the responsibility for the AMPs while they're there doing the work. They in the contract, it says the logger, one of the responsibilities of the logger is to follow all the AMPs and do proper closeout when they're done and ensure that it meets all the AMP standards. That protects the landowner. If the logger were to leave halfway through and not implement the AMPs, they can go back on, and get them to do that, hopefully through the contract. But like timber sales, you might have a timber sale in an area or on a road for 1 or 2 seasons, and then that road or trail system might sit for 15 or 20 years. And in between that time is also important to protect water quality, and the landowner should, and the forester that works for that landowner is responsible for ensuring that those water bars are holding up. The stream crossings are, if they're permanent stream crossings, they're working and viable, and just maintaining so that road doesn't get destroyed in the next 15 years. And then when they come back 15 years later, have to rebuild it. That's part of the reason why we're in favor of temporary bridges, because you don't have to worry about maintaining a bridge for the next 15 or 20 years. Unless you want permanent access, that's a different thing. But and culverts and things like that. It's with our Skidder Bridge program, you don't have to put in as many culverts as you used to. You can just leave them out and put a Skidder Bridge in when you needed to.
Nelson has a question. Zoom question. Oh,
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So they're AMPs, acceptable management practices. We used to have that in agriculture and they became required practices. Are you envisioning these going the same way? That's part one.
You want me to answer now or wait?
Yeah,
Wait
go
till I hear
ahead.
part
Answer
two.
it now, yeah.
Okay, I have no, not heard that that was gonna happen, or any plans of that happening, whatsoever. So I can't really, beyond that, I can't really talk to it too much.
Okay. And then the second part is, I think I understood at one time there was some monies made available to help fund these AMPs, for the mulching, the seed down. After the log job was completed, I'll pull Sam Lincoln's name. I saw on social media a job they finished up last year and how beautiful it looked when they got done. And those money, was that just a one-time deal to see how it worked, or is that something in the plans to continue? Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your question. That, I think the program you're referring to and the money that have been made available is referring to the Slow Camp program, which is a pilot program that we have been working on. And I have a slide to cover that I think will answer a lot of your questions. And if not, after that, please ask more if we don't get to that. But yes, there's a pretty significant new program that's happening right now, and it hasn't rolled out to the loggers yet, but it will be. We're anticipating early summer that we'll start to see loggers being able to apply for proactive practices to improve access and kind of help them meet their responsibilities for the AMPs and make sites more reliably accessible. So I think we'll hit that.
good. Yeah, and Representative Lipsky had a question too.
Yeah, just, this was a clarification for members of the committee who may not have been here last year. A lot of these examples, you're seeing a temporary skidder bridge, you've seen a temporary truck bridge and other initiatives. These are all, we use the term AMPs, acceptable, but these are all required. Every logging job, whether there's an R word, an A word, you're responsible for protecting, stabilizing, making sure there's zero discharge into any waters in the state of Vermont. So they are required, despite if it's an A or an R, before, during, and after the harvest. But these are examples of particularly it's serious cost, the kind of equipment it takes to, prior to harvest, prepare a landing, truck roads, skid roads. The intent of that funding was to provide assistance, economic assistance to the landowners and log contractors to implement these flood resiliency and permanency for active management. So these are good visual examples of that. And whatever Representative Nelson is referring to, you're just referring to what's a proper closeout of any log job under the AMPs. It involves seeding and mulching and permanently sort of protecting not just the infrastructure and the potential of future harvest, but the waters of the state of Vermont. And that's been the law for a number of years.
All right.
I agree with what you said. I think that it's required by law to avoid a discharge. Where what statute says specifically about the AMPs, that the rules adopted under this subsection shall be advisory and not mandatory. And Dave is sort of understands the interplay between the legal requirement to not have a discharge associated with a logging job, but then how the overlay of the AMPs on it is advisory. Trying to build on that help.
Right, right. Did you have something?
Well, I did want to say, you could bring in UVA, maybe.
Right, yeah. So the hydro connected portions of timber sales or harvest areas that are within let's say 100 feet of a stream or a body of water or wetland, those AMPs are I'm not going to say mandatory because they're not mandatory. However, it's mandatory not to have a discharge. So anybody who's working in the woods is going to understand that that really means if you don't want to lose sleep at night, put in the AMPs and you're going to be preventing discharges and you're going to be protected because you're doing the right thing and those things are appropriate and done properly, and therefore the site is in compliance is what we're really talking about. So in the current use program, part of eligibility of the UVA program is that the AMPs are required to the maximum practicable extent. And those include all of the AMPs practices that are possible on a site, not just the ones that are hydrologically connected. So if you have a trail system that it needs to have water bars on it based on the slope of the trail. You need to have forest buffers that are maintained per the AMPs, and certain sizes of stream crossings need to, when you redo a stream crossing, you need to make sure that you use a size that's properly referenced in the AMP manual. So there's a little bit of the entirety of the AMPs that are good to do everywhere, and you have to do them on UVA land. But those that are key or small and mandatory, in my opinion, would be the ones that are hydrologically connected. And it doesn't really, to me, pass the straight face test if you said, well, I didn't need them because there's no discharge. Well, you just wait long enough and they're not in, there's going to be a discharge. So, but that's my best shot at explaining that. So,
thank you. The nuance there is nuanced, and I think we could have maybe another conversation another time just to go through what the statute says, the distinction between UVA and non-UVA,
and again, let me just the UVA requirements are an eligibility requirement, not a clean water rule requirement. There's a difference there. If you don't do it, you're not eligible to be in the UVA program. It doesn't mean that you have a water quality violation. So it's the tax department that would be, I believe, have the problem with it.
It could be picked out.
Yeah, you could be removed from current use if you're found not eligible by not implementing it. So I'm gonna.
let's keep going then. Yeah.
All right, responsibility, I think we touched on that. The progression of the AMPs established in 87. We went a long time without really readdressing the AMPs. They were updated in 2016. They were updated again in 2018. And then in 2019, we created a new AMP manual. And in 2022, we created a new app. We were definitely the first state in New England to have an AMP app, one of the first few in the whole country to have an app, and others are starting to work on that now. I know Connecticut is trying to do something very similar to what we have. The revisions, new standards for stream crossing structures. We address hazardous materials more specifically. We updated the spacing of water diversions on different types of trails and roads. We have enhanced stream buffer guidance. We strengthened the standards for stream crossings and stability and going to 50 feet of seed and mulch instead of 25 feet. And then we clarified the coordination with the ANR stream alteration rule and general permit to make it more clear to loggers when they needed a stream alteration permit and when they didn't. The app has some really good features. It's very easy. Everything in the manual is available on the app. Plus we have new features such as a planometer, which helps you space your water bars out properly based on the slope of the trail. You just hold your phone up to the slope of the trail and hit the button and it tells you how far apart they need to be. It has a soils map built right into it that we can access a soils map. It's all of our contact information. And the beauty of the app is we can't change the rules and we don't want to, open up rulemaking all the time. That's not fun, but we can change the additional information and our contact information much easier in an app than you can in a printed manual. We have print 2,000 manuals and you're stuck with it for, a few years. You need an app changed and you call somebody and it's done by lunchtime. So it works very well that way. And it has some additional cost calculators in it for the logging community. Sam Lincoln worked on this with me when he worked for the department and brought with him, a really good sense of what loggers would use and what they were looking for. So our department, the Watershed Forestry Program, does a lot of education and outreach to get this information out to the public. It's the regulated public, the public in general, so that folks understand what the rules are. And that training includes staff training. So we're consistent in providing the right information. We work with the LEAP program. We work with the Master Logger program. We do bridge workshops, temporary, permanent bridge workshops with StreamAlt. The fellow in that photo on the right is from StreamAlt. He's talking to, I think we had 30 or 40 loggers there that we educated on the StreamAlt rules and how to do temporary crossings. And we have several webinars and work with partners to make a lot of that available online. We have a temporary bridge cost share program, trying to get more bridges out in the landscape and so loggers can use them. We've done it in the last, I did not update that part of the slide in the last 6 years, 59 wooden bridges and 10 steel bridges out to logging community directly through cost shares. We have another 15 bridges that are available through the conservation districts available for rent that we did through this program. And I'm currently working on a cost share program for 10 more temporary steel skidder bridges. The photo in the middle those temporary steel bridges that I'm talking about. There's 5 of those there. Each bridge is 2 panels, 6 feet wide, and they make a 12-foot wide bridge by 25 feet long. And then the department also has its own bridge rental program for heavy duty steel bridges. We have 3 of the bridges on the left available for rent. We have 2 of the 40-foot bridges and 2 of the 30-foot steel bridges that are available to rent. We rent them for the whopping amount of $100 a month for all of our bridges. So we don't want cost to be an excuse or reason for someone not to say, oh, I couldn't afford to do that. They have enough money in moving it and trucking it around. And we just want to make them available. Our first 2 bridges, we got through a grant with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. the two new ones that we're getting are clean water funded bridges. So, and then the program that I spoke about earlier, the Water Quality Assistance Pilot Program, which we call SLOW Camp, which is supporting logger compliance with AMPs. That is the program that's about, well, we have a grant agreement that's been signed and executed. We are working with the team to create the application and the eligibility guidelines and all the methodology and practices that will go forward with people being allowed to apply for money to implement the AMPs. And those are for proactive practices, not just close out practices after the job is done, making it look nice. We want it to be proactive. So throughout the job and even before the job, making the sites suitable and dependable. One of the biggest things about the weather that we have now is a job you think is ready to go, the weather changes and it's not because of those weak areas, those bridges that aren't big enough, those culverts that aren't sized properly, soft spots in the road. This money is to allow to create those or to bring those roads up to AMP standards so they're more durable and more reliable for access. And some of those practices will be hardening truck roads, improving drainage on skid trails, and improving stream crossings to be more flood resilient. And again, our hope is to have that program accepting applications by the summer of 2025. We have some pilot projects that we want to do before that to kind of test the waters, so to speak, and then we'll be full bore. We have $700,000 to funds for implementation that will go directly to loggers for those purposes.
And I think this is the program, Representative Nelson, that you were maybe thinking of. And just to say it again, really, the legislature last year was approached by the logging community with a request to dedicate some funding to a program like this. And we were able to put it into the budget last year, and we'll look forward to hearing, I guess, next session on how things are progressing.
We'll get a report back to the legislature, the pilot line, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to continue it into the future.
That's part of the program too. The report. Okay, so any questions on that sort of stuff? I'll get right into our monitoring and enforcement program. This is where the regulatory aspects of the AMPs are located. It's a complaint-driven process. We don't have forest notification. We don't have inspections that we do. We rely on citizens, foresters, whoever sees, if you see something, say something is our motto, I guess. It's a complaint-driven process. So as well as our technical assistance program, it's a free program that offers technical water quality assistance to loggers, foresters, landowners, anybody who asks about a future logging operation or even an ongoing logging operation, and they're having trouble deciding what to do or thinking about if what they want to do is in compliance with the AMPs or whatever. We will go out with them ahead of time and sort it out with them and give them recommendations. These are some numbers here are from 2024. Essentially, we had 34 complaints. We had 20 of those 34 complaints had evidence of discharge. And 30 of those 34 were resolved. 3 need to be revisited. Some of them we got late in the year, and we can't do the permanent closeout until spring because it's really hard to do anything final right now in the woods other than put in a temporary water bar or emergency water bar. So 3 of them will be closed out in the spring of 2025. And one of those cases is referred to enforcement. So it's technically not resolved. So that's why there's 4 that's why they don't match up. 3 are on hold until spring, and one is referred. We had 22 technical assistance visits, and 56 total A&P activities, either a complaint inspected or a technical assist visit. If you looked at the trends of where we see the issues, the discharges, this pie chart shows most of them are in the stream buffer and relative to stream crossings and skid trails. That's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So that's why we've been focusing so heavily on skidder bridges. And the best way to improve stream and road intersections is to put in a proper bridge. And that's how we came to that decision, why we're spending so much on bridges. And if you look at our requests for technical assistance over time, you'll see that's coming up. So I think we're building a relationship with the logging community. We're getting more calls and more requests to come out and visit their jobs instead of them being afraid for us to visit their jobs. And if you look at the number of A&P complaints received, is trending down. And I don't, we know we're never going to get to zero. But I think we're leveling off a little bit. It's getting harder, but we're seeing it going in the right direction. And then cases referred to enforcement has been low, one a year, if that, currently. So I think we're trending in the right direction with what we're seeing. And that's what I have on the A&Ps.
You can grab one of those gold stars. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, if you went back 3 slides, you'd see a gentleman with high visibility. He's a water quality enforcement. Yeah,
A&P Forester.
A&P Forester.
So he's an employee of
Rick
the
Dyer.
department.
He's one of the 3 people on the team that they.
Yeah.
And I want to say, and those statistics in your graph charts indicated, Rick Dyer is not there to put loggers and landowners out of business. He's there to make sure they stay in business, understands what they provide as far as ecological services and management is critical. And I think those statistics are important. And the technical assistance visits, how many they are. Many of us are now comfortable with calling Rick or someone else prior to cutting and saying, what do you recommend, whether it's locating how you enter a public way, where you place your log landing. They're not like calling the DMV, is this truck overloaded? They are here to make sure everyone succeeds and everyone's protected. And I just think that's a different culture that we're living under now. And I'm very appreciative of it.
He covers North Central and Northeast Vermont. Does a fantastic job there. But we have other staff who are also doing a great job. But amongst many other responsibilities in Southern Northwest Vermont, if I could wave my magic wand, I'd have a carbon copy of Rick and deploy into other parts of the state.
Representative Birch.
I'm just gonna say that the data you gave at the end, that's really useful, and I appreciate it, show the success of what you're doing, so thank you. Great.
And I'll just, this photo is a great photo in many ways because it shows Rick interacting with loggers. It's a father-son logging duo. The son is reading the A&P manual. You can see that in the photo. And you can see the silt fence that they had to put up because they had a landing they didn't leave a buffer between the landing and the town road ditch. And some of the mud from the landing was seeping into the ditch. And it was going down the ditch line and getting into a very small intermittent stream, going under the road and getting into Ward Brook, I think it was. Very minor, but a great photo of what we're trying to do. And
Just one last question. Who is enforcement? So who are you referring it to?
That's a great question. We have an MOU with the DEC enforcement, environmental enforcement officers. So when we need assistance with our enforcement, like various things, an access order, for example, if we don't get permission to go on a property and we need access, the enforcement officers will help with that access. They have seen a lot of other program responsibilities, so we're trying to do as much in-house as we possibly can. So enforcement also includes not just the EEO, environmental enforcement officer, but the litigation attorneys that are in their program as well. And so when we have an enforcement case, it gets referred to the Enforcement Review Committee in A&R. And then if it passes muster through that committee, it goes on to the Enforcement Division litigation attorneys. And they're the ones who write the administrative orders and everything else that help us seek a penalty or whatever we want, or whatever we decide to do for enforcement. So the enforcement is the EEOs in addition to the litigation attorneys that kind of follow through that on that program. But it's a cooperative with DEC and in all of A&R.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
I should have allowed Oliver to
No,
answer that.
that's exactly right, and we're doing,
over my pay
we
grade.
do much of the investigation ourselves, because as Dave said, the EEOs are pulled in many directions, there's
Yeah.
a limited number in the state. And then when we do the referral, that's when the attorneys get involved and we begin legal action against the alleged violators at that time. And that's led to, in some cases, penalties and, cases closed with penalties and fines, et cetera, paid by the perpetrators. So, this is germane to the timber trespass discussion you had last week, which is another subject, but it's all done, the investigations as much as possible are done by David and his team with assist from state lands foresters.
All right. Well, David, thank you for both of those presentations. And
Happy to
yeah,
be here and provide what I can.
okay, great. If we have any follow-up questions, we'll reach out. So we will take a 10-minute break before we continue with our next topic.